because during a lengthy House Judiciary Committee hearing yesterday, Attorney General Pam Bondi clashed with lawmakers over the DOJ's release of documents tied to Jeffrey Epstein. Throughout 5 hours of questioning, Bondi offered little new information on the files, but there was a lot of shouting, throwing insults, and deflecting questions.
None of them asked Merrick Garland over the last 4 years one word about Jeffrey Epstein. How ironic is that? You know why? Because Donald Trump, the Dow right now is over, the Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch. Not on our time. No way. And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, oh, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer.
Committee will be in order.
Donald Trump attended various parties with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files
I'm reclaiming my time.
Be released.
I got your answer. You said there's no evidence.
Trump,
I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you. Here is a witness statement.
Now, despite reports of President Trump's private complaints about Bondi, the White House issued a statement praising her, along with supportive comments from senior administration officials. I want to get right into breaking this down with former litigator and MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. You know, Lisa, I think SNL is probably going to have a field day with this hearing because on its face, it was sort of laughable reality TV style. You and I were on the air yesterday as it wrapped, and our colleague Carol Leonnig was likening it to the Jerry Springer show. And yeah, it had facets of that. And I think it would have been funny, except for the fact that the subject matter is just so deeply serious. Everything from the Epstein files to the moments where they did push into corruption within government, the moments where they pushed into election interference and the concerns that people have about the way that DOJ is, for example, taking ballots out of Fulton County, Georgia to investigate the 2020 election, right? So many deeply serious things were touched on. So just your reaction to yesterday's hearing, and the question I was asking lawmakers yesterday was, did that even accomplish anything?
Well, look, that was an Oscar-worthy performance in some ways for a constituency of one, the President of the United States. And if that were a film, I'd title it The Pugilist, because Pam Bondi was nothing if not combative and ready to defend Donald Trump's record on all fronts. The most productive exchange, Allie, that I can say I saw was one between Pam Bondi and someone who I didn't think would necessarily engage in a productive exchange with her, which is Eric Swalwell, who has typically been a big foil for the administration. The conversation that they had was about threats that Swalwell has faced to himself and his family, often in the wake of what he described as the weaponization of the first Trump administration's Department of Justice against him. Attorney General Bondi was very receptive to his complaints, and her response to him was, first of all, I have some information to share with you off camera about what we're prepared to do about the people who are threatening you. But more importantly, to all of you, and she looked at members on both sides of the aisle, none of you should have to endure threats. None of your families should have to endure threats. But lost on the Attorney General was the fact that that statement should have been equally applicable to the row of survivors sitting right behind her with whom she appeared to not want to make eye contact. And that was one of many disjunctures throughout the day that I found particularly striking.
Yeah, I thought the Swalwell exchange was also really surprising, frankly, for the way that she handled it. I heard the line of questioning he was asking, and I think many of us who were watching the hearing sort of braced for the kind of response that she would have. And frankly, it was the right response to have. And I think you're right to bring it back around to the poor way that the Epstein survivors told me that they felt they were treated during that hearing yesterday. There's also this piece, because you and I were breaking this down on the air. Attorney General Pam Bondi had two binders in front of her when she appeared at yesterday's hearing. Now, MS Now can't confirm exactly what was in the binders, but Bondi appeared to read from them and reference talking points that either praised President Trump and the administration or criticized Democratic lawmakers on the committee, sort of why lawmakers were talking about her having a burn book of sorts. This picture was taken at the hearing, and it shows contents of a separate black binder titled Jayapal Search History and a list of numbered documents that coincide with the Epstein files. I then spoke to Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal shortly after yesterday's hearing, and I asked her what she thought this was about. She told me she assumed the searches she made this week regarding the Epstein files at the DOJ would probably be viewed by DOJ officials, maybe staff. However, she said she didn't believe her search history would actually be used as fodder for Bondi at the hearing. Additionally, Jayapal said she and all other members who came to review the files at DOJ were asked to sign into DOJ computers with specific logins. So Jayapal speculated it might be the reason DOJ opened the files up to Congress 2 days early, so they could essentially, in her words, surveil members to see what they planned to ask Bondi when she came before the committee, sort of like an open book test. We haven't received a response from the DOJ to Jayapal's comments, but House Speaker Mike Johnson did respond to our questions about this, telling MS Now, quote, it would be inappropriate if the DOJ looked through Jayapal's search history of the Epstein files. Watch what he said.
Jayapal assumes the DOJ is tracking her search history. Is that appropriate conduct?
I'm not going to comment on an allegation that is unsubstantiated. I don't know anything about that.
Attorney General Bondi testified, and she had a piece of paper that had Jayapal's search history in her binder of the Epstein files.
I don't know anything about that, and I'm not commenting on it. I haven't seen or heard anything about that.
Thank you,
But
sir.
that would be inappropriate if it happened.
That was my colleague Seda Ashgar asking the speaker those questions. Ultimately, he says it would be inappropriate if that happened, but it does appear that's exactly what happened because Jayapal is saying it. Suhas Subramaniam, another member of the committee, is saying it. Nancy Mace also took to Twitter to say, yeah, I think that they are docking our search history in there. So is that sort of thing even allowed?
Well, let's start with, is the DOJ allowed to sort of maintain records of their search history? There are legitimate reasons why the Department of Justice would give them logins. I mean, that's one way of securing the unredacted Epstein files to which they have allowed members of Congress access. To the extent that the question is, are there consequences for that? I would say there probably are not legal consequences, but you and I often talk about the different spheres in which the two of us operate.
Yes.
Me in the legal sphere, you in the political sphere. Are there political consequences for this? There likely will be. I mean, the hypocrisy of the GOP members who yesterday were perseverating on the fact that some of them had call records subpoenaed in connection with the FBI and DOJ's January 6th investigation, combined with the fact that the Department of Justice, which Pam Bondi said has ended weaponization, is then essentially weaponizing members' search histories of the Epstein files to prepare for a hearing. That, to me, makes that whole claim to have their privacy invaded very rich. And, of course, all of this, to me, Ali, is secondary to the biggest invasion of privacy of it all, and that's of the survivors who are victims, once again, of inappropriate, sloppy, and what they have said is even deliberate indifference to their privacy and safety with respect to how these redactions were done in the Epstein files release.
Yeah, you're bringing me right where I want to go, but I also want to underscore what you made there as a point about hypocrisy for members who are mad that their phone records were accessed by the DOJ during the Arctic Frost investigation. This is now a moment where you have to question, is this not that and worse? I also want to point back to a moment in the hearing when Congresswoman Jayapal asked the Attorney General, could she apologize to the Epstein survivors in the room, and she refused. Watch.
Attorney General Bondi, you apologized to the survivors in your opening statement for what they went through at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. Will you turn to them now and apologize for what your Department of Justice has put them through with the absolutely unacceptable release of the Epstein files and their information?
I'm not going to get in the gutter for her theatrics.
In an interview after the hearing, survivors said they felt, quote, degraded by Bondi's refusal to face them. Danny Bensky, one of the Epstein survivors that attended yesterday's hearing, said she had 3 opportunities to address survivors. We stood up, and all she had to do was turn around, and she couldn't even turn around and face us. That's just also some of what Danny said to me during the hearing. I want you to play just a little bit of our conversation. I also think for those of us who are up here on the Hill, we're used to seeing things break down along Republican and Democratic lines. But this feels like something that shouldn't have a partisanship.
Shouldn't be partisan at all. And it's something that we've been saying. We've been taking meetings with everybody we possibly can on both sides of the aisle. We've seen people cross the aisle. The Transparency Act is a law now. They work together on that. And so I think our plea has always been, don't let this be about politics. Please keep this personal and make it personal for your story.
Personal for your story, but Lisa, I mean, what these women have been advocating for is just, please give us some justice.
Yeah, and they've also been advocating to meet with people at the Department of Justice. In a later exchange in the hearing, I believe it was Congressman Goldman who asked the survivors to stand up if they wanted a meeting with someone at the Department of Justice and raise their hands. Uniformly, they all raised hands, and then he asked them to raise their hands if they had obtained an audience with anyone at the Department of Justice, and none of their hands were raised. Look, it was a missed opportunity for Pam Bondi to show some contrition and humanity. The fact that she said, I'm not going to get into the gutter with those theatrics almost seemed like, inadvertently perhaps, she was comparing the survivors to those who lived in the gutter. I thought it was an unfortunate choice of words at best. And again, I feel the utmost of sorry for the survivors for having to endure that spectacle yesterday. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but the behavior was not exactly exemplary on either side of the aisle. It was a travesty to watch for anybody who cares about Congress.
Yeah, but I will say on the front of just turning to the survivors, it could have been really easy. MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, thank you so much as always.